Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Michael Orkin. Dr. Orkin is a statistics professor at Berkeley City College and a consultant known for his work on probability and gambling games. He is the author of several books, including The Story of Chance Beyond the Margin of Error, which is really what we talk about here. The book breaks down a lot of different concepts within statistics, all around chance and probability. And what we talk about here is a little bit of the math, but also more, how does it translate to real life, the decisions that we make, the bets that we make? How do we know when to bet? How do we know how big to bet, whether it's money or whether it's our time or things like that? And so it was a really interesting conversation. Doesn't get too mathy, so don't worry about that for the non-math nerds out there. But I think it was really interesting conceptually just to think about how we can improve our ability to be successful navigating the world. And that's really what this is all about. How do we improve our odds of getting to the outcomes we want and being successful, whether that's as individuals, as teams, as companies, what have you. I hope you enjoy it. Here is Dr. Michael Orkin. Dr. Michael Orkin, welcome to the show. This is a little different. I don't know that I've done one on statistics before, and people might be wondering what statistics have to do with a people business podcast. But I think your work on how we think about and process randomness and chance and all these kinds of statistical concepts will be really interesting. So I'm excited.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, O'Brien. Good to be here.
Let's just dive right in. Why are we so uncomfortable with randomness?
Well, people want to have a strategy for doing things, just for getting through their everyday life, in which they're not worried about suddenly getting run over by a bus or something like that. Unfortunately, or getting sick, which is a random thing. But people nobody likes that. Of course, there are good sides of randomness. You can win stuff. You can do well. You can be a success in business. That involves randomness too, but people worry about the dark side of randomness.
Yeah. As we think about just how we operate day to day, maybe how we operate at work, where does it make sense? Where do we benefit from embracing randomness, and where should we fight for order?
I think I can do better at answering the first part. I'm not sure about the second part, but
okay.
Let me just give you an example. And this is an extreme example because I like to talk about extremes in these situations. So let's look at the Mega Millions lottery. In the Mega Millions lottery, you have to buy 5 regular, you have to pick numbers between 1 and 70, and you have to pick another number called the mega number. And anyway, if all of your numbers are the winning numbers, which are selected twice a week, you win a minimum of $50 million. That's great. That's the good side of randomness. And it's purely random. A lot of money is spent to maintain the equipment, to make sure there's no cheating. And so as far as I know, I'm convinced that it's a random process. So your chance of winning the jackpot, there are lesser prizes, but your chance of winning the jackpot is about 1 in 290 million. And what does that mean? So even mathematicians have trouble with numbers like that because it's a very small number. And that's a partial answer to your earlier question, why are people uncomfortable with randomness? And it's because sometimes very unlikely things happen and people are uncomfortable with that. So to give you an example, if you buy 50 Mega Millions lottery tickets a week, you win the jackpot on the average of once every 112,000 years. If you have to drive a mile down to the mini market or wherever to buy a lottery ticket, you have to make an average of 608 round trip tickets to the moon before you win the jackpot. And finally, one person in Canada, just one person in Canada, put that person's name in a hat along with everybody else in Canada and buy a lottery ticket and then draw someone's name at random from that hat. You're 7 times more likely to pick your friend's name, that one person, out of the 40 million people who live in Canada, than you are to win the jackpot. So,
wow.
People have said that if you buy one of these Mega Millions lottery tickets, or some people have said that your chance of winning the jackpot is about the same whether or not you buy a ticket. Now, obviously, that's not true, but the question remains, or is, given those terrible analogies, why are there winners? And the answer to that question is, and this is actually, it's not about lotteries, it's about life. The answer is there are winners because so many people buy tickets. And it's the opportunity to be a winner. And the same is true for lots of events that are very unlikely for you to have happen to you. You go into a coffee shop and see your long lost cousin who you haven't seen in 30 years. You might think, my God, that is impossible. How is this possible that we met like this? But there are lots of people going into lots of coffee shops and lots of long lost cousins, and it's opportunity. So the same is true in business. If you give yourself the opportunity to be successful in one thing or another, and of course, an important part of this is everything isn't like things are not generally like the lottery, where you just have a random chance, same as everybody else. Generally speaking, in business or in other activities, sports, you may be better at some things than other things. And so it's important to realize, what you like, what you're good at, you want to talk about the business thing, and then you'll have a better opportunity than others. I do a lot of consulting for game developers who are putting online games with wagering, trying to get on the App Store, trying to get a bank. And you have to show that basically one of the things you have to show is that the game is a game of skill, not a game of chance. And so that's this huge distinction. It's not cut and dry one way or the other, because most games, even if they have skill, have an element of chance. It's like if you watch golf or play golf, you know that no matter how good you are, somebody can come in and beat you, or you could have a bad day, or you might have to drop out of the tournament because you have a back problem, which is what happened to Colin Morikawa at last week's championships. So the point is that opportunity, you have to make opportunity available. And one of the things that I've learned about when studying games is that you have to pick a game that you're good at.
Yeah. Is this kind of related to like the difference between winning the lottery and being struck by lightning? Because you talk about that in your book.
Well, that's a good thing to bring up. So that's another example of randomness. So the National Safety Council has a website and keeps track of, also the Weather Service keeps track of lightning strikes. And so roughly speaking, so people compare your chance of winning the lottery to the chance of getting struck by lightning. Your chance of getting struck by lightning is much higher. It's about one, instead of being 1 in 290 million, it's about 1 in 1.2 million, something like that. But how do they get that? You don't buy tickets for the drawing to being struck by lightning. So what happened, and in fact, it's not just purely random the way the lottery is. Because if you're sitting at home in California watching sports on TV, the chance of you getting struck by lightning is approximately 0.
Yeah.
But if you're playing golf in a thunderstorm in Florida, the chance is much, much higher. And so what they do is they just average everything. And so your chance of getting struck by lightning, even though it's talked about in the same way as your chance of winning the lottery, it's a completely different thing. And in between the two things I was talking about, namely a game of pure chance and a game of skill, because you can in fact, you can use a little bit of skill. You don't want to get struck by lightning, namely stay inside when it's a thunderstorm.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is pay attention to the game that you're playing. And if you are in a work environment where things are a little bit more random, maybe that's a tougher environment to operate in, but most environments are not like that. Most environments, you can influence the outcome. And so figuring out what tasks create more opportunity allows you to then generate a lot of opportunity. And that's the old adage, it's a numbers game. If in sales, if you make enough cold calls, you'll set some meetings and you'll get some deals. Like, and maybe you're not very good at it, but if you put up a big number, something will come out of that.
That's exactly right. And in fact, and you're right, that's what all the self-help books and the people who go around giving advice say. You just have to keep trying and keep trying. And even if your chances are low, eventually you'll win in some sense. And and that's true. But I add to that, figure out what it is, two things. What it is you like to do, and two, what you're good at. I could never have been a professional basketball player, and I knew it until I did other things. I was very involved in sports, some sports. And then when I became a math major, because I was good at that and I liked it. I liked other things as well. So I'm just speaking for myself, but everybody has the same kind of situation. There are some things that you're just naturally good at. And even if you're not, if it's something you really want to do, you just work really hard. I was reading someone's Substack today, and he's an economist, and he was talking about how he had to work 10 times harder than all of his fellow students when he was a graduate student, but he loved economics so much that he kept doing it. It was worth it to him. And now he's a successful economist. So that's a component.
Yeah, I think people forget that a lot when we're out operating in the world, and it's, oh, I need this one thing to go right. And it's, no, you just need to do that thing 100 times, and it should go right at least one, if not give you a couple options. So
right, exactly. And that's another important point. Take the options and pay attention to them, because there are always options coming up until you to focus on those options.
Yeah. And I think on the one hand, that's daunting because it requires a lot of work. But on the other hand, it's very empowering because it gives us the opportunity to go out and do things we want to do. We just have to be willing to put in the effort and the reps and volume to get better and eventually get there.
That's exactly right. And you have to be willing to put in the work. And also another thing you have to be willing to do is to accept failure. And that happens. That's part of the randomness of everyday life. That you have to keep, it's part of the same thing that you're talking about. Then we have to keep trying. And what that means is, another way to think of that is, you have to accept failures as part of growing and getting better at stuff.
Yeah. I want to shift over maybe from randomness to probability. And this is another thing that we don't do very well with. Why are we so bad at gauging probability?
Okay, so first of all, probability, randomness is something it's a part of nature. And probability is something that we have developed to measure randomness. So it's a measure of randomness. And sometimes it's easy. Probability is a subject taught by math departments and statistics departments and other departments that do quantitative things, economics department. And now actually statistics is the number one undergraduate course in the country in terms of how many people take it.
Wow.
Because data science has become so prevalent, and also because of technology. If you're a sociology major, I teach an elementary statistics course online, and my students are from all over the place. Some were sociology majors, some are math majors. And one of the things we talk about is probability, and people have trouble with it because it's often a new topic. It's sometimes complicated, and it's sometimes easy. So people say, if I say, toss a coin, what's the chance that heads comes up? Everyone's going to say 50-50 or half or 50%. And that's correct. And if I say, what does that mean? Not everybody, but a few people will say, if I do it a large number of times, heads will come up about 50% of the time. That's called the law of averages. But not everybody knows that. So when you start trying to interpret what these things mean, probability becomes a little more challenging. But then if I say, toss a coin 10 times, still talking about the simple thing, tossing a coin. Everybody understands what that is. What's the chance that you'll get, or the probability you'll get 5 heads and 5 tails in some order? And if you try to write down all the combinations with 5 heads and 5 tails and 10 tosses, It's not easy. It's challenging. In fact, you really need a combination formula. It turns out there are 252 ways that you can get 5 heads and 5 tails out of a total of 1,024 combinations. People get stuck on that. And so did early mathematicians when they were developing these things. Just simple gambling games start getting complicated when you do something more than just heads or tails.
Yeah.
When you start adding combinations on.
And so does that make the case that we should just stop talking in probabilities for complex things? Because I'm a salesperson and people will say, what's the probability you're going to get this deal? I think this one's a 60% chance we get it. I think this one's, I don't know, it's a long shot. It's probably 25%. Who the heck knows? Should we just stop that? Should we just stop talking like that?
Well, in some cases, maybe. I mean, what you were talking about is what generally people call subjective probabilities. Or some other people, sometimes that's known as SWAG, which stands for scientific wild ass guess. And you can't stop. People are going to keep asking you that question.
Yeah.
And you're going to be asking other people that question. It's just how we think. People think about the odds of stuff. I had a student once, a number of years ago, who teaching regular stat course, we were in the probability section. And he couldn't get anything. I mean, if I go anything more complicated than causing a coin, once heads or tails, he was lost. And so he came to my office hours one day to ask about some fairly simple problems. And he said, I'm just lost. And so I said, well, what do you do? Otherwise, this guy was probably in his mid to late 20s. And so he clearly was out there doing stuff. I said, what do you do when you're not taking classes? And he says, I go to the racetrack. And so I said, okay. And so instead of saying the chance is 1/3, I said, the chances of this is 2 to 1, 2 to 1 odds on this. He immediately knew what I was talking about. And so for him, I just put everything in terms of odds like they have at the racetrack. He got an A in the course. He knew exactly what I was talking about. So my point is just that people have an intuition for these types of things, but it's not necessarily in the language of mathematics and the way we talk about it.
Yeah.
Just the other thing we see, another ringer that messes people up, including professional statisticians. So I'm in California. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. So you can naturally ask the question, because it's an earthquake country, what's the chance that there'll be a major earthquake? Not small earthquakes. Small earthquakes happen all the time here. So what's the probability that there'll be a major earthquake, let's say above 6 on a Richter scale, in the San Francisco Bay Area sometime in the next year? So you would think people could look at data. I'm talking about people in an elementary stat class, but the people who are experts in this area. But it turns out that's a very complicated question, so complicated that nobody can give a good answer. But 2 friends of mine, David Friedman and Philip Skark, wrote a paper on this. They're professors at UC Berkeley, where I went to school. A number of years ago, they wrote a paper about this, estimating the probabilities of a large earthquake. And their conclusion was that it's just not really possible to give a good estimate that's backed by math.
Yeah.
You can give rough guesses, which is what you were talking about a minute ago, and people do that. And someone who's an expert in the area could probably do better than somebody who's not.
Yeah, but it's more intuition than statistics.
Yeah. There's a whole area of statistics called Bayesian statistics, in which some of it involves updating information based on new information, but some of it involves the subjective probabilities, where you're just basically going with expert opinions.
Yeah.
So it's an area. So when you start asking that question, it's an area where that's a very legitimate question, because it's an area where you can go from simple things to very complicated things all of a sudden without even thinking about it.
So it seems to me like what struck me when I was asking the question, you were answering it, is like a better way, or maybe a better approach than saying, what are the odds we're going to win this one, is to say, how do we improve our odds to win this one?
Yeah.
There are always things we can control to move the world more likely, again, to move the probability in our favor, even if we have no idea what that probability is right now. So I think,
well, that depends. That's a good point. And it depends on whether the event we're talking about, the situation we're talking about, involves skill of some kind, or it's just pure chance. I cannot improve my chances of winning the lottery. I could buy more tickets, of course. That improves my chances, but it costs more.
yeah.
So technically, it's not really helping me. But I can go play craps in a casino rolling dice, and I can practice for years, and I'm still not going to do any better than somebody who just walked in and watched the dice be rolled for the first time. So those situations we can just set aside. And of course, in everyday business life, there's skill. And one of the definitions of skill, one of the technical definitions of skill that I use in analyzing the games that people want to put online to get in the App Store and stuff, is one of the things that distinguishes chance from skill is that with skill, you improve with experience. With chance, you don't.
Yeah.
And so that's a key indicator in what you were talking about.
Although my 4-year-old seems to win every damn board game we play, and I don't know how he does it. He's the luckiest chance game player I've ever seen. Brings up an interesting point that I wanted to ask you about. There's a good book, Fooled by Randomness. There are a lot of cautionary tales in there around people who thought they were good and they were really just riding a wave that was moving in the direction they wanted to go. And so how do we look at what we're doing and what we're engaged in and really assess, is this us or is this the randomness of the time and the wave that we caught? Like, how do we tease that apart?
That's a very good question, a very difficult question. I think that somehow people generally know what they're good at in some way, but especially once they get to college age and beyond, and they've had enough experience in real world, they know what they're good at. Oh, you can tell that. I mean, your 4-year-old probably an excellent game player and will always be, but that's one of the key things is know what you're good at. And of course, pick an area where you can get better as time goes on. Don't go sit in a casino or at the craps table.
Maybe a different way to ask this too is, what's a good way to be able to tell the impact that luck has on the thing we're trying to do? Like the book Fooled by Randomness talks about bond traders, right? And they all thought they had the market figured out, and then the market, like the rules changed, and they realized, oh no, we were just riding this positive wave. So sales could be similar. Like, how do you tell whether you have skill or whether you're just putting up enough numbers to get some results? What are some ways to assess how much randomness could be in the cocktail?
Yeah. So, well, you should be able to maintain success over time if it's skill that you're dealing with. If you're just riding the wave of randomness, that wave will eventually crash onto the shore and leave you lying there. And people have, even if they're not number crunchers, they'll have typically people who will have a good understanding of that, or at least some intuitive understanding. Now, but you mentioned Fooled by Randomness, another good book about this area in general. It was written by the name Nissim Taleb called The Black Swan. Did you ever read that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good book. And he talks about, that book's been out since the mid-1980s, I think. And he talks about people being fooled by randomness who are in he was an options trader, so in that world. And by not understanding that things aren't really like the normal curve as much as you think they are, because there are all these mathematical facts about the bell-shaped or normal curve. That there's one mathematical theorem or fact called the central limit theorem, which says basically that if you take averages over anything and look at the data in the right way, you'll get a normal curve. When you do that, you sometimes, and this was the point of the black swan, you get these black swan events that don't really get considered. The black swan event, as defined by Taleb, was something that is very unlikely to happen. For example, the black swan, one was first discovered fairly recently, I think at the end of the 19th century, and that was a random thing. And the point is that people overlook rare, very unlikely events. And his whole book is basically about that one thing.
Yeah.
But it's an important point, and that is that, going back to what we're talking about, is that even if you're successful, that you're successful over time, you're not riding a wave. There's always some randomness, so you're going to have ups and downs like a wave. But if you don't just all of a sudden go broke, if you use proper money management strategies, I talk about that in the book, that you still have to be careful and be sensitive to these very rare events happening. And that's why let me give you an example that applies to both gamblers and to people in the bond market or the stock market, or people who are options traders or doing anything like that. People in crypto. You can play a game in which you have a better than 50-50 chance of winning, like playing blackjack. If you're a card counter, and let's say you have a 51% chance of winning, you've read Ed Thorpe's book called Beat the Dealer, which was written based on computer simulations back in the 1950s. It was published in 1962, but it's still in print. And it has card counting strategies for blackjack. So if I learn one of those, it takes skill, in other words, to be a good blackjack player. If I learn one of those and I'm skillful, I can get a slight edge over the casino. Let's just say 51% is my win probability, which means I'll win 51% of the time and lose 49% of the time. Blackjack's a little more complicated than that because things change as the cards are dealt. But let's just say that you have a 51% chance of winning, which means you have a good bet. It means that if you can have those odds, and they're even money payoff odds, that you will win in the long run. Let's say, oh, great, I have a winning bet. So I'm going to bet everything I have on this bet. 51% chance of winning. So what happens? I have a 49% chance of losing. And if I do this a couple times, I'm going to get wiped out. I'll be broke, even though I have a good bet. And so that's one thing that people don't realize about people who are in the markets or in things like that, that even if you're gambling, and even if you're playing a game of skill, and you have a better chance of winning than the casino or wherever you're playing against, if you bet everything each time you play, excited about the fact that you have a winning bet, you'll go broke. Yeah. Because the chance of losing is not zero. So a famous example of this is, and I mentioned this in my book, is a book called Number Go Up by Zeke Foe. I think that's a pseudonym, but anyway, it's about the crypto king, Sam Bankman-Fried, who we all know about if we study if we work at these things. SBF, as he was called. Very smart guy. Was a billionaire before he turned 30. Has a degree in physics and math from MIT. And he was such a smart guy that he didn't pay attention to that little fact. If you have a good bet and you keep betting all that you have on it, so he was great in the crypto business that he was in. He was great at identifying good bets. And he would invest way too much money on the good bets. As a result, he went broke. Not only did he go broke, when he went broke, he started borrowing from people who didn't know that he was borrowing from them. And then he wound up in prison.
Yeah, that's called a Ponzi scheme, and you end up in jail.
Yeah, and right now he's Diddy's roommate. But a math guy working at Bell Labs in the late 1950s named J.R. Kelly wrote, that's not the same as the R. Kelly that we know about in the rap business.
Speaking of people in jail.
People named R. Kelly. He wrote this something called the Kelly system, which is this sort of complicated, in some cases, but easy in other cases, system of how to bet if you have a good bet. And it's something called a fixed fraction system. And fixed fraction means you always bet the same fraction of your bankroll. Your bankroll is how much money you have to bet. So the more you have, the more you bet. The less you have, the less you bet. If you said, let's say you're supposed to bet 20%, let's say the odds and everything give you that number. You're supposed to bet 20% of your bankroll. Well, if you have $1,000, you bet 200. But if you're down to $500, you only bet $10, or let's say 20%, $100.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're always betting the same percentage, but as you start losing, which you will, even if it's a good game, you will bet less and less. And as you start winning again, you bet more and more. And that's the optimal way to grow your bankroll. There's this well-known strategy, which is double or nothing. Every time you lose, you double your bet, figuring that when you eventually win, you'll make up for all your losses. Well, the Kelly system is the opposite of that, basically, in the sense that the double up strategy or double your bet strategy, some will call it the double down strategy, has you increasing as you lose and decreasing as you win, which is the opposite of what you're supposed to do. What you're supposed to do, if you have a bad bet, Kelly system doesn't apply. Kelly system says don't bet. But if you have a winning bet, which is measured mathematically, as SBF called it, if you have positive EV, which stands for expected value, which means on the average you'll win.
Yeah, it's if you're in a casino, all the games in a casino are bad bets because it favors the house. But if you were to play one of those games and the odds were 51% in your favor, that suddenly becomes a good bet.
Like blackjack, which you can do or used to be able to do. They changed the rules somewhat. But anyway, the point, so you're right. But the point is when you have a good bet, positive EV, like SBF called it, you should use something like the Kelly system, because even if you have a good bet, you will go broke if you don't manage your money properly. Yeah. So anybody who's a trader, like an options trader or a stock market investor or something like that, needs to know that.
Yeah. I think it's human nature a little bit too, to have something not go our way. And then we go, now I got to make all that back. So I got to put more into it. Versus being patient and saying, okay, whoa, that didn't go well. I'm going to slow this down. I'm going to maybe put a little bit less in next time and let's see if we can get it right. And then, oh, shoot, I got it wrong again. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit less in. I'm going to test it again. And then, okay, now this one works. And now I'll up my bet again. Okay, now I'm back in the game. But we just don't have that patience.
Yeah, but it turns out that that's the only way to optimize the growth of your income. Anything else, you'll do worse. And if you do things like bet everything you have at the one, even if it's a good bet, you'll go broke. Yeah. So yes, that intuition, which is hard to follow, as you point out, is the right thing to do, is to be patient. But Kelly found an actual formula for that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Back to your portion about black swans. There's an author that I really like, Morgan Housel, who wrote The Psychology of Money, and he's written some other books. Yeah. He points out in some blogs that I've seen of his that like it feels like black swans happen all the time. There's all these terrible things happening in the world, or all these once in a generation things happening in the world. But the reality is that the list of 1 in a century or 1 in a million year things that could happen is so large that every year a number of them are going to happen. And so we look in the world and we feel like it's chaos and, oh my God, all this crazy stuff is happening. But the reality is, statistically, there's just so much that could happen that, like to your point about seeing the long lost cousin in the coffee shop, there's just so many people walking into so many coffee shops. There's so many crazy things that could happen that inevitably crazy things happen all the time.
Right. That's right. And that's what people don't appreciate. That there's so much opportunity for stuff to happen that has a low probability that some of the things will happen. Yeah. And so that surprises people. They don't know. The writer, the famous psychiatrist and writer, Carl Jung, back in the 20th century, which seems like a long time ago, coined his own term for this. And it was synchronicity. That was the term that he invented. And to him, synchronicity was something that was in between physics and randomness. Namely, it's some weird thing that makes these weird things happen. But the fact is that what he was really talking about is this opportunity idea, that given enough opportunity, weird things happen just due to chance. Yeah. That's exactly right. As you were saying, there's so many things happening that you see stories written about one mini market in Ohio that has sold 5 winning jackpot tickets. And it's true. And the reason is because there's so many mini markets and so many people buying lottery tickets. It's just by opportunity. There'll be one that will have 5 jackpot winners.
Yeah.
It's all just chance.
So switching gears a little bit, you mentioned that sort of over time, most things fall into some kind of normal distribution curve. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
I have to be a little more specific. And
I'm
that
not
is-
the statistician, so I'm going to butcher
Yeah.
all of this.
No, it's okay. If you have a sequence of events or taking a random sample and you look at what happens on the average, and you take averages, and if you look at these averages and have lots of different averages, we have lots of different samples from the same, let's say, population, then after a while, when you look at the averages, they'll form a normal curve. Things will get sort of like the law of large numbers, but it's called the central limit theorem. It says that you can understand the probabilities of things, or if you look at the percentage in the sample that feel a certain way in a public opinion poll. Do you approve of the war in Iran? Yes or no? So you sample 1,000 people and ask that question, yes or no, and you get a percentage. So let's say you get 450 out of 1,000 who say yes. Okay, that's one number. But let's say you do it again and you get 1,000 people. And then you get another number. It won't be the same just due to randomness of a random sample. And there are millions of people around. Let's say 480 people. The next time it's 520 people. Next time it's 450 people. You can actually put a measure or put a limit on that because it's called the margin of error. But if you look at all those different percentages, which are just a bunch of numbers, and graph them, it'll look like a normal curve after if you have a large enough sample.
So this may not apply to what you're talking about. And tell me if it does, but I was curious because I was thinking about if things fall onto a normal curve or if there's a normal distribution curve for most things. Companies out there are often, almost all of them, are trying to hire the best people, right? And they're trying to elevate above the competition. And so if talent falls on a normal curve, how can companies think about elevating the talent that they have? Is it like, can we just shift the distribution curve so all of our people just fall higher, but they still fall on a distribution curve? Or will it all go back to a norm? I don't know if does that question make sense?
Well, yeah, it makes sense. I think it's a little bit harder to quantify that situation that you gave. But I think it is true that if you're the head of a company or the head of or in charge of workshops and skill improvement and stuff like that at the company, that it may be the case that you'll start out, well, if you're measuring a specific skill, then maybe the skill range is like taking a test. Presumably, test scores have a normal distribution. Now, that's not always true, but let's just go with that. So test scores would be measures of skill, how well somebody did on a skill test. And so let's say that falls on a normal curve. So then if you're the person in charge of improving people, it makes sense. I can't put this into a mathematical statement, but it sort of makes sense that if you give the same opportunities, the same skill workshops to everybody, that you can just move over the normal curve. But that doesn't always work, I don't think, because there'll be various reasons why some people are excelling and other people aren't doing so well, and that'll get mixed around.
I interviewed a Navy SEAL years ago on the show, and he wrote a book called The Talent War about how special operations teams vet talent. And they built a recruiting firm. He built a recruiting firm that would help vet candidates better than the typical vetting process. And what he talked about was a gating system in the military where they would, in phase 1 of BUDS, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but phase 1 of BUDS was basically just a beatdown. It was like a sufferfest. Who is willing to stick with it? Number 2 was what they call pool comp, which is, can you think and follow procedure under pressure when you can't breathe, when you're panicked? So can you do it under pressure? Then phase 3 is, can you learn the skills that you need to learn? And so they keep gating you through these things. And once they're done with one, then they move you on to the other. And what it seems to me like maybe what they're doing there, they're testing everybody and there will be a normal distribution. And then they'll take the high performers from that distribution and then they'll put them in another test where there's a normal distribution. And then they'll take the leading edge of that test and then they'll put them in another test. And they'll continue to just whittle down at the leading edge of the distribution curve. And eventually, like if you were to just test all the Navy SEALs, there's a normal distribution curve of high performers and low performers, but they've so skewed the results to high performers.
Yes, it'll be a much differently located curve than for people who are not Navy SEALs trying the same things that Navy SEALs have to do.
Yeah,
but it may still be, if you graph it, you may still get something that looks like a normal curve.
It's when you step back and look at all the normal curves, it's so far on the extreme of performance. And so it does make the argument that he made in that book for gating, right? Yeah. People test people in different ways or for different skills, and they continue to take the people who lead in those areas. And eventually you get people who are very high performers.
Right. Now, of course, that only works. That works in certain circumstances where you have a very well-defined set of skills that you want everybody to have. You want everybody to be able to act well under pressure. You want everybody to be able to run a mile in less than 6 minutes. You want everybody. So then you can do this gating thing. But in some situations, it's much fuzzier than that.
Sure.
And you're not quite sure what the things are you want people to excel in, or how you test what the things are.
Yeah. I like your point earlier about extremes, right? I like looking at the extremes and being like, okay, how do they do it? And then how do we translate as much of that back into everyday life as we can?
Right.
So there's one other kind of theme I want to talk through here, or set of questions that I have for you, which is around getting feedback from our workforces or from our groups. There's a little bit in the book around sampling. We can do random surveys. We could do surveys of certain groups. We could do focus groups. We could just go out and walk the floor and get feedback.
Right.
What do you think are the best ways, or what's a way to think about and frame out how to get the feedback we need from the people around us, or our workforce or our team?
Right. So I think in a contained workforce that's not too large, doing things like focus groups makes sense. You talk to a selected number of people. In a focus group, the reason focus groups were invented was, one of the reasons was that you want to get more in-depth interviews with people that are more open interviews than if you have are you going to vote for, do you approve of the war in Iran? That's not a focus group thing. That's a sample thing, the sample survey thing. But in some cases, it seems to be better to have the focus group format where you could go talk to someone for a while and go into depth into what they're thinking and talk to enough people, and you get a good feeling for what the whole population is doing. Now, focus groups are somewhat controversial in statistics because statisticians like to think of controlling randomness with things like public opinion polls, where you can have something called the margin of error, where you're 95% sure that the fraction of people who approve of the Iran war is between this and this. You can't do that in a focus group. Focus group is more fuzzy. But what you can do in a focus group is go more into depth with people. So I think if you're the CEO of a company with 150 people, it doesn't make any sense to do a random sample and just ask a couple of questions. And maybe it makes sense to do a random sample and go into detail with those people so they get more like a focus group. But if you have 50,000 people in your company, then maybe it makes more sense to do a random sample and get some more structured information from.
Yeah. What would be the best way to get that more insightful information from large groups?
You mean the focus group method?
Does the focus group method just break down if it's really large populations? Or
no, I don't think so. I'm not an expert on focus groups, but if you have a really large population, you can still run a focus group. One way to do it is to take a random sample of people and take a large enough random sample so that you have a good cross section of everybody in the population, and then sit these people down for a focus group. But the trick is, how do you get a bunch of people together and sit them down to talk to them? It's not easy. And you have to have a small sample because it's just hard. And that's why almost all public opinion polling is done by telephone now, which creates a big problem that people, which is that, well, first of all, it's a good thing because everybody has a smartphone. So you can call people at random, do what's called random digit dialing, to give everybody an equal chance of being called. That's the definition of a random sample. But the problem that has arisen with this, which has really frustrated lots of people who run polling organizations, is that now because everybody has a smartphone, everybody's constantly deluged with these spam calls. And so when a public opinion pollster calls, click, people hang up.
Yeah.
Won't talk to them. So it's hard to get accurate information. And so things like focus groups are getting more popular because it's so hard to get information. We need to do a phone survey now.
Yeah. Yeah. I probably have gotten a bunch of those calls. I haven't answered a single one of them. So yeah. Yeah. This has been a great conversation. I think we've gotten through a lot of the things that I want to talk about, and even a lot of the questions that I had, you've answered. I think the last one, which might just be a fun story to finish on, unless you have anything else you want to add, is, can you talk about what a Lollapalooza is? You included that in the book, and I just think that would be like a great lesson to end on.
Well, okay, I'll tell the story of the Lollapalooza, which interestingly enough was originally told to me by my graduate advisor when I was a graduate student. He was a guy who never told jokes. I walked into his office one day. He said, "Mike, I have a joke." And so it was like this amazing thing. He had a joke. But anyway, here's the story. A gambler is taking a vacation, driving through Montana. He stops off at a pub in a rural area to have a beer. He walks in, he sees there's a poker game in the back. So this guy, who happens to be a gambler and a professional poker player, decides, I think I'll try to get in the game. So he goes in the back and says, "Hey, do you guys mind if I sit down and play?" And they say, "Sure, sit down." And so he sits down. Not much happens. It's a standard poker game. And then after a while, after about half an hour of play, he gets dealt a flush. And all cards are the same suit. So he's very excited. And after a while, there's just him and one other guy in the pot. And they make their final bet. There are $5,000 in the pot. And they throw down their hands. And the guy says, "I have a flush." And he starts raking the cards because the other guy had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2 hearts, 3 clubs. And the other guy, the cowboy, as the gambler starts to rake in the pot, says, "Not so fast. I have a Lollapalooza. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2 hearts, 3 clubs. In this town, a Lollapalooza beats everything." And so the guy says, "Oh, God, okay." And he couldn't argue with these cowboys sitting around wearing guns. And so he let the guy take the pot, and he thinks, okay, I'll just take my time and I'll eventually win it back. So about an hour later, he gets dealt a Lollapalooza, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2 RX, 3 clubs. And so he plays very carefully, but bets big. And after a while, there's $10,000 in the pot. And there's just him and another guy playing. Well, everyone else is folded. So there's just 2 guys left, him and another guy. So they turn over their hands, and this guy and the other guy had a full house, and this guy turns over his cards, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2 hearts, 3 clubs. He says, "Aha, this time I've got the Lollapalooza." The cowboy grabs his arm and says, "Sorry, pal, only 1 Lollapalooza per night." And so that's a pretty good, it's obviously a joke, but it's also a pretty good story.
Yeah, there's a good lesson there too, right? Of know the game you're getting into.
That's
and,
right.
Don't play games where you don't understand the rules, or you don't.
Exactly.
The rules could change on you. So I thought that would be a great way to end this.
Yeah, that's a good story. And you're right. It's not just a joke. It has meaning.
Yeah. Be careful the games you play. Be careful who you play with.
Understand the rules.
Yeah. Mike, thank you for coming on the show. Really fun to dive into how we take the statistics and think about it in the real world. Definitely encourage folks who are listening to this to go out and read his book, The Story of Chance. It has a lot more of the stories like the Lollapalooza and some other things like that. Some good real world examples of how to think about this stuff. Anything you want to add, Mike, before we sign off?
No, one little thing I wanted to add, I thought of as we were talking, and that is we're talking about things like winning the lottery and opportunity that there are winners when enough tickets are sold. But another factor that's involved there is that people, and you notice this now because of all the social media, and that is people are interested in exciting things, not boring things. And people are interested in winners, big winners or big losers, not people who haven't done that much. So there was, in my book, I have an example of a guy, and he's still on TV, a very well-known TV economic forecaster who's predicted correctly every stock market crash for the last 30 years. And it's true, he has. He advertises himself that way. And the reason that he's done that is because every week he predicts a stock market crash. People don't pay any attention to all the times he's wrong when he predicts a stock market crash and nothing happens. They only remember the times that the market crashed. And the reason is that's people like exciting things like that.
Yeah, it's good to keep in mind when you're out there. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Right.
Those are the three kinds of lies out there. So,
and here's my book, The Story of Chance Beyond the Margin of Error. You get it at Amazon, you get it from the Walmart, online Walmart bookstore, places like that.
Fantastic. Thank you all for listening. Go make some better bets this week, and good luck out there navigating all the randomness.
Thanks, O'Brien.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.